everyone for getting involved on that. Today we have a very different focus. Today we're going to be looking at workforce and culture. So I have a panel of 4 others, all experts in their areas, of course, and we're going to be taking questions throughout this session, and a few questions that we're coming pre-prepared with as well. So just some basic kind of housekeeping before we get underway, introductions. You'll have the comments section, whether you're on Twitter or LinkedIn. Put any questions that you have into this, and they'll feed through to us and we can put them on screen. So these can be as challenging or as easy, we hope, as they can be. So we'll get on to some introductions now, and we'll start with Claire. So I'll add Claire in. Hi, Claire, you okay?
Hello, hi. So thank you very much, Matt, for having me. So my name is Claire Seeley. I'm a business development manager with Reed Education, and I specifically support schools and multi-academy trusts. I think part of the reason I'm here today is that I've been with Reed for 10 years and have worked with primary, secondary and SEND settings in that time. So have seen a massive shift in particularly the arena of workforce and culture. So looking forward to today.
Brilliant, thank you, Claire. And I'll add in Lisa now. There we go, just
Hello.
like magic.
Absolutely. So welcome all. I'm Lisa Blatchford, and I am the HR Director of Viking Academy Trust. And I'm a newly appointed member of the Multi-Academy Trust Association Advisory Board member. So I'm really excited to be here today. I've worked in schools for about 15 years now, so I'm hoping that actually my expertise in that area will be something that can help you guys today. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lisa. And Lois, let me add you in. There we go.
Hello. Hi everyone. Welcome to this broadcast. Similar to Lisa, I'm an advisory member of the Matter Board as well. My main role, though, is as CEO of Inspire Education Trust. We're a multi-academy trust that's based in Coventry and Warwickshire. We're a mixed mat in the fact that we have secondary school and also primary schools, and we are doing some fabulous things here. So it would be great to share the opportunity of that with you all.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And last but not least, we've got Rachel. There we go. We'll just make you there.
Hi everybody. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. I'm the HR director as one of my roles for One Education, but also the director of education strategy. One Education has been around for 12 years now, and it's a service it's a company that provides various services to all different types of educational establishments, including multi-academy trusts, but across all different areas in the education field. And because of my sins, I've been an employment solicitor, but have worked alongside, so I'll own up that now, but I won't go on about employment law. I moved over into HR for many, many years ago, but obviously that background helps as well. And we work with all different types of schools, and obviously from a HR perspective and from a strategic perspective of what's going on in the education landscape, workforce and culture is huge and has lots of different opportunities, but lots of different hurdles as well, particularly at the moment. So really excited to be here.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Rachel. So yeah, just to get started, trying to think about who to pick on first. So we're going to start with a question of how do you measure if you have a good culture? Of course, we're talking about in your school or in your trust here. Lisa, we'll come to you first. Lisa? Oh, I think that was freezing there. So
Okay.
we'll actually go.
Can you hear me?
Oh, there we go. Yes,
Hello?
yes, can hear you now.
Yep.
So sorry. So that's a very good question, and thank you for picking on me, Matt, first. So I would say talking to your staff, that's a great measure in terms of your culture. I think culture for me is about the personality of the organisation, so it's the intangible aspect. And actually getting down to the grassroots. Sometimes we have those subcultures, and quite often they can be felt when you actually speak to staff, particularly when, you have an environment where you've got low morale, but actually staff like working there because they like their fellow teammates, etc. So in terms of measuring it, I think, employee engagement surveys can certainly be, I would say, a benchmark, and then getting to the nitty gritty in terms of speaking with staff and connecting with staff and finding out actually what is the word on the street, so to speak. And then perhaps later on down the line, once you've got your data in terms of your employee engagement surveys, actually looking at that, unpicking it a little bit further.
I think we're just cutting out there a little bit. So I've just muted you there, Rachel. Sorry, Lisa, just so we can move on to Claire next, who's on the other side of things, I guess. You work with a number of schools and trusts, don't you, Claire? So what are you kind of finding how schools and trusts measure whether they have a good culture?
Thank you for that, Matt. So measuring culture, I completely agree with everything Lisa said. It's something so massively intrinsic, and it's something, I work in an organisation, we have a really strong sense of culture, and I think anywhere that you work should aspire to that. From how we see things, because we work as a supplier to schools and providing staff to schools, there are a few tells, and I suppose rather than measure, the things I can talk about are maybe the tells, the things that you might sort of think about. And some of the things are, in the recruitment field especially, your advertising, that can give a really strong feel for a place, and especially in the current market, in a lot of positions, I'm sure this is going to be in the conversation anyway, there's going to be a different level of applicants to perhaps what a lot of people are used to, and there's certainly a lot more competition for the very best people than there probably would have been. So culture can really come across in the way you advertise. It can come across in how you attract staff and what your process to recruit and onboard a member of staff is. And I think that's something that's so important in the current market, that from the minute you engage with somebody for your trust, that they have a really positive feel of you, because they're going to be judging yourselves as much as you are them. And that's such a big shift, I think. And the other side, and this is sort of, I suppose, the more negative flip side, is looking at things like retention figures, looking at if you've got particular departments, particular schools perhaps, and looking at, is there something about that site or that team that is different to other places? Is there something going on culturally in the background? But exactly what Lisa said, although those things can be something that might alert you, okay, there's something we need to look at, they're not necessarily a strict measure. They're just things that can be good, like data points to look at and think, okay, am I on the right lines with this, with the feel of things?
Brilliant, thank you, Claire. Rachel, I noticed some nodding of the head there, so you must agree.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely echo what Claire was saying. I think a lot of the HR data that schools, multi-academy trusts will already have and utilise on a daily, termly basis will be available. So yes, it's great to do staff surveys and everything, but actually, your absence levels, your difficulty in recruitment, your turnover levels, your promotion, if you can promote and you do promote from within, that's good because you've got succession planning, all that sort of stuff. But I mean, I actually do think that it's absolutely key and critical now, because of the recruitment crisis, that retention is the key, and to retain staff. So it's not actually, you're not having to recruit all the time, and they want to stay. I think it's all about well-being. Is not a buzzword. It's not best practice. It's absolutely an investment, and that's where you win your FDs round and your chief operating officers round. Sorry for some knowing smiles there, because actually that's going to be a cheaper investment than it is on your recruitment and your supply staff and your recruitment advertising and all that sort of thing. Because as we know, you're really battling now. It's becoming more of a corporate society in the education sector, dare I say that, because you're really having to battle against other schools, but not so much just other schools as employers and other multi-academy trusts. It's especially for, I'm very much about the whole school staff approach, but where your staff pool comes from may be very different. Your teaching staff probably further afield. It's, they enter it as a vocation, as a profession. They may leave or remain in your school for the same reasons, for the culture that we're all talking about. Your support staff may come from very different reasons from your locality, and therefore they're joining a school for different reasons, because it's local, it's near, it's seen as a secure job, it fits in with childcare, etc. But they will remain with you and stay with you, or indeed unfortunately leave for the exact same reasons as maybe teachers do. So the well-being of staff is not an added value. It's not, oh well, if we've got some money at the end of the day. It's going to be huge as a strategic tool, as an investment in your staff. So I actually think all your key indicators, your HR indicators that you'll have already, that you'll either be moaning about or using on a daily basis without even realizing it, that's the things you need to be thinking about. Including, your things like, why are people leaving? Why are they, your return to work interviews, all those fundamentals from HR is exactly what you need to be pulling together to actually get, as Claire was saying, those sort of underlying behind the scenes issues and trends, be it within departments, within key stages, or indeed, within a bigger organisation like a multi-academy trust on a site-by-site basis.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Rachel. Really useful. Lois, now as a CEO of a trust, is there any particular practices that you're using at the moment?
Well, I completely agree with what everybody has said so far, and Rachel is absolutely right, because my board love a KPI, and obviously they want to use that to measure how well we're performing at various different things, whether that is around our standards and our outcomes of our pupils, or whether that is around finance and HR. What we have moved towards now, because in the past we have done wellbeing surveys, staff surveys. We actually call it a cultural survey now. And we do that on an annual basis, obviously asking those pertinent questions. And again, that gives us a firm basis and understanding. And we really try to promote that to make sure that we get those levels of engagement, to really ensure that that is giving us a proper view of what our staff actually think. But in reality, it's far more than that, because that's kind of the corporate view, I think, that Rachel is referring to. Whereas the reality is, when we think about culture, it's how we as an organisation value things. It's the way we do things around here. And that is what's really important. So as well as obviously surveying our staff to try to understand that, it's really, as I think Claire was talking about, and Lisa, really listening to your staff and thinking about, what they're doing, how they are interacting with one another, how they are particularly speaking with our children, are also the softer measures that we would absolutely look for.
Have you noticed any particular changes as well, kind of over the last few years? It's been a huge time of disruption, of course. Absolutely. I think when you look at the private sector, of course, people expect different things in their jobs now, and maybe things that weren't so high up on the priority are now the top.
Absolutely.
Work from home obviously isn't an option, but
Yeah. Well, without doubt. But essentially, when we consider well-being, that is far, far more important to everybody, certainly to us as employers, but obviously to our workforce as well. And I know the Department for Education are obviously trying to encourage flexible working far more. And I think too much in the past, school settings, whether that's in a multi-academy trust or otherwise, been able to say, well, you can't do that in teaching because teachers got to be in front of the class. But now as we grow through the academisation system, that's not actually the case, and there should be opportunities, particularly when our teachers don't have their contact time, how that can be arranged, how that we can support more flexible working to ensure sure that all of our staff, whether they're teaching staff or support staff, have that opportunity of a work-life balance. Because one of the changes we've noticed, Matt, is when different folks come to join us, what do we call them now? Is it the Generation X or whatever it is?
Z.
Z.
We're on Z.
Yeah, that's it. They are far more interested in their well-being and their work-life balance than they are necessarily about how much they're going to earn and what their promotion prospects are. We have to do that. We have to do it all, don't we? But that is one of the main changes that we've noticed in the workforce.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Claire, Reid, God knows how much data you have in the sector around why people leave jobs, why people go into jobs. Just any comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, I completely echo everything Lois has said. I think there's been a massive shift. And I think, data-wise, you can look at the broad data and there's a massive spectrum of what happens. I think speaking from a sense of I work directly with multi-academy trusts, and the people that I speak to are HR directors and people that are involved in that world. And some of the biggest shifts that we've found are that certainly it's sort of shifting away from purely a focus on teachers and the need to get strong teachers, and actually the support staff, and that whole school approach, that whole academy approach is so important. And I think what you were alluding to before, Matt, about the shift in terms of private organisations, you probably see I'm working from home right now. People do, and it's shifted. It wasn't something I ever did before COVID, and I think what that's meant, particularly at your support staff levels, when you look at school office staff, when you look at people in the finance and the back office functions, the people that keep the whole ship moving, that those people have got different options in front of them now to what they probably had 2 years ago. So if you're looking at, for example, office administrators or office staff, it may well be that 2 years ago the term time working was perfect for them. It may well be that being on their doorstep was perfect for them, and it may well be that now your competition as a school isn't actually another school. Your competition as a school is the fact that there's a company saying, well, you can do exactly this job but 3 days of it are working from home. And so how you approach that, and I think one thing I would really say about the shift in culture is the employee value proposition. That way in which you position yourselves has literally never been more important. I'm sure you've seen there are figures out there literally in the last couple of days that unemployment's at the lowest level it has been in a long time. We've been doing a huge amount of work just feeding on from what Lois said about, Gen Z and the newer people coming into the market. And, we've certainly seen that youth unemployment is beginning to fall as well. So that did hit quite a scary peak at nearly 15% during COVID, because of course they're likely to be the people in hospitality and catering in all those areas that just got closed down. That's now beginning to recover. So certainly those younger people, those newer people to the workforce are also being snapped up. So there's definitely a shift, I think, culturally in how an employer and a MAT would want to position their employee value proposition, and what their values are is so important. And I think, it's something that people are a lot more confident in asking. We've noticed that in the interview process all the way through. A few years ago, it was very much a tell me about yourself, tell me what you've done, tell me why you'd fit in here. And actually what you probably find from your hiring managers right across the board is they get a lot more pushback of, well, what have you got to offer me? Why do I want to come and work for you? And they've almost turned the tables. And I think that's something that certainly isn't bad, because it means when someone chooses your MAT or chooses one of your schools, it's because they know it's right. It's because they're confident. But it's just something I think to be aware of.
Really good points. Rachel, just any closing comments on that before we get on to kind of the next question?
No, I don't think so. I think the only thing I would say is that it's very much school by school. We all know when we enter a school, we can feel the culture, can't we? And we can feel that I don't know, it's that warmth, that whatever. And I think we're very, very good at, and I think we have been for many, many years, thinking about pupil well-being and pupil welfare. But I do feel that maybe bizarrely, the education sector was a bit slow on the uptake on the staff well-being and the staff welfare compared to maybe something like the NHS, even though you work very closely with the NHS. I think COVID, and I completely echo what Lois was saying, COVID, we all hated it. I get it. Education sector, they did remarkable things through COVID, and it was like nightmare years that I think we're all having counselling from still. I say tongue in cheek, but it's actually we don't want to lose what we've learned through COVID. You know, I think we have learned that not every teacher needs to be on site every minute of the day. Governing body meetings don't have to be, live. They can be virtual, and you actually get probably more people turning up. In fact, CPD for teachers and for governors can be done like that. So we've actually learned through COVID the technological world that actually makes our work-life balance easier. Parents' evenings, another classic example. You can have a teacher sitting on their sofa, having some interaction with their own kids before starting parents' evening, and it's that sort of thing. Even if it's a mixed hybrid world, I get that at the end of the day, it's the education sector, and therefore teachers have to be in a classroom, and there are things that need to be done on site. I absolutely get that from a HR perspective, but I do think that flexible world that the DfE was trying to introduce, because I do think the education sector was late to it, knowing, having worked in the corporate sector, I don't think it's quite as black and white. And I think, to be fair, COVID has taught leaders and indeed teachers, but on the flip side of that, as Claire was saying, it's expected, wanted, needed, and if you don't offer it, then people are going to walk anyway. So it's trying to get, typical legal answer, a nice balance that's workable for your school, really.
Brilliant. I can support that straight away, because the parents' evening comment there, I was a governor in a small primary school in Cheshire East. They're in quite an affluent area, really, and they learned that that's the one thing they're definitely going to be keeping post-COVID, because their parents were working, their parents or guardians were working long hours or through the night. They don't have the time to come to the parents' evening, so that way of kind of working around parents' evening for them was really good. So yeah, I just thought that was worth commenting on. We've had a question as well from LinkedIn. I'm going to put this just to one of you. So what plans do you have to bridge the gap between current recruitment practices and standing out as a viable option regarding supporting a positive working culture? I'll come to you, Lois, because I probably want in the opinion from a trust itself, I'm guessing.
Yeah. I mean, this is really tough, and some of the things that Rachel and Lisa have already spoken about, we're really experiencing at the moment under the current economic demands that everybody is facing, particularly around our support staff, because we are limited around some of those roles and what we can pay. And to be quite frank with you, they can go down the road and get paid more when they work at LD. So therefore, if we want to retain some of these really key and important roles within our organisations, then we're really going to have to look at some of those initiatives around what makes us really attractive. So some of the things that we've been looking at is moving away from just the traditional recruitment in terms of our attraction strategy and where we advertise, to broaden how we do that and the platforms that we work with, and then it's very much setting out what it is that we are offering over and above the basic salary and what you see on the job description. So in our trust, we call them some of the little things. It's the little things that we offer to try to help that, such as employee assistance programs, for example, obviously extensive CPD for all of our staff, no matter what grade that they are, and really showing that we listen to what they want to do and try to support it in as much as we possibly can. But again, the absolute thread that runs through that it is our values. And again, we need to be able to ensure that people are coming to join us are very aligned to our values. So again, making that clear in our advertising materials is what we endeavour to do.
Brilliant. That's really useful. I hope that's helped with your question. I don't know why your name didn't come up. Maybe some privacy settings there or something. But yeah, thank you very much for that answer. Now, we've all been there, hotel Wi-Fi. Now, we've got Lisa in the background again. I'm going to try add her in to hopefully give some thoughts on that question, which was bridging the gap between current recruitment practices and standing out as a viable option regarding supporting a positive working culture. Hopefully, Lisa, we can hear you.
Fingers
there we go.
crossed. Can you hear me? Okay,
Yes.
I'm sorry, I've got my camera off just in case. But I think Lois certainly had some real valid points there. And I think also about employer branding and being an employer of choice in terms of some of the recruitment practices that perhaps, you know, going more into a marketing side of things and actually really showing about, like Lois said, the value side of things, and actually connecting and aligning with those values is so key now, because we cannot offer anything more in terms of pay. Actually, you can get that meeting of the minds in terms of, you know, what, you know, values are connecting us all. And I think that actually, yeah, we've kind of got to become salespeople in terms of recruitment now. You know, it's a competitive market. We no longer got the lure of term time only as being the attractive thing for working parents. Actually, we're competing, as Rachel said earlier, in terms of you know, hybrid working, etc. So actually, what do? We've got to almost become creative in terms of how we market ourselves as a school or as a trust, and it certainly is going to put us through our paces, I have to say, in terms of what we do in HR.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And we heard that all loud and clear, so we're all good there. We've had another question. Do you see the traditional method of recruiting in education changing? Claire, I'm pretty sure you're qualified to give a comment on that.
Sure. So I think there are a few ways of answering that question. So I'll probably just focus on two. And the first is looking at how you recruit your permanent staff. And I think Lois mentioned it right away. You know, it's looking at what avenues you use when you're looking at different, particularly focusing in on that support staff narrative. You know, people that are looking for work potentially as a teaching assistant, working in school office, working as a bursar, in all those different roles, there's a very high chance they're not solely looking for work in that particular area. So where in teaching world, you know, teachers in a particular location know what works for them. They know what works. You know, Matt picking up on Cheshire East, you know, you or I, we're in the same county. We could probably tell you exactly where a teacher would look for work. If you're looking then as support staff, they're probably looking at read.co.uk a lot more. They're probably looking at those different job boards. They're going to be considering a wider market of job vacancies. So I think that's something really important to consider. Obviously, I come from an agency myself, and we do permanent recruitment for clients. And if that's a route you're considering, there's a bit of advice I'd give there, which is just to make sure whoever you're choosing to work with, that you're really partnering with that organisation, that you understand what they're going to do for you, what the process is going to be, and ultimately a really effective recruitment partnership for permanent staffing, which is something I know schools are using a lot more. You know, it's very, very commonplace in the commercial world. It is, you know, most agencies will have a temporary resource and then a permanent resource division. That's how they do things, and schools are certainly doing that a lot more. But my advice would be that make sure you've got that partnership, make sure you trust who you're working with, they understand everything we've just discussed in the first half hour, really, the culture, the values and what you want, because it's all about that match. How it typically should work for you if you do choose to work with an agency is usually their cost comes at the end. So from your point of view, if you're having those conversations about purse strings, which is obviously the most important thing to also be considering alongside getting the right person, it's at what cost. It's then making sure with most agencies you should be paying once they've started, once that candidate has started. So from your point of view, you're justifying bringing in an outsourced provision should you need to. And I guess the other way I'd look at it is on the temporary workforce side. And I think that's something that quite often can get overlooked, because you've sort of got your supply staff and then your permanent members of staff are often seen as two pools. And I think COVID has done a huge amount to sort of make that a more cohesive picture. There are things happening in the sector from a recruitment point of view that are probably worth mentioning when it comes to temporary staff. The biggie is that the Crown Commercial Service have just launched their second version of their framework for supply staff. So within that, it includes basically a whole sort of a list of suppliers that you can go to get your staff in place, and it's all sort of vetted and verified. And from a procurement point of view, you know that you're going to be all above board. The main ways to do that are sort of a preferred supplier or as a managed service, which is definitely picking up in the sector, more that partnership with an agency and a partner. But the reason I mentioned looking at the two sides of that coin is that with your temporary workforce, you can also be considering how you can get the right people in your temporary workforce onto your own contracts. And that is something that, you know, no school should get stung with. It should be a really upfront, open conversation with a supplier, whether it's an agency, whether it's someone that's come to you directly. It's understanding their background. And the Crown Commercial Service does like a 12-week temporary to permanent handover. So that's how that would work. And I think it's worth mentioning that because that is a slight change in how schools can consider their recruitment. And obviously you can do all of that and should be doing all of that in line with the Keeping Children Safe in Education guidance, Ofsted DBS guidance. Most of the agencies that are working in that sort of field have got additional sort of things to their name as well. So Reed, for example, are APSCO Plus accredited, and that's like a kite mark for that side of things. So when you say traditional method of recruiting, I guess the reason I mentioned two sides is that there are two methods. There's your temporary and your permanent. But I just thought, yeah, and not all of it, you know, I'm obviously speaking from the point of view of someone who works in an agency, but not all of that actually involves agency usage. It's just how you get the right person is just something to be really open-minded about. Exploring more your partnerships, exploring more, like Lois said, how you're advertising, how you're attracting people. And I suppose the parting thing I'd say is just coming back around to the people that are entering the workforce, you know, considering what you're doing to capture those people that potentially could quite quickly solve some of your recruitment challenges. If you've got local colleges and people are leaving college with, you know, a childcare qualification, for example, could your trust be working more proactively with that college to attract people directly in? That type of thing. There certainly is more, and schools have traditionally had a very reactive approach to recruitment because it falls in line with safer recruitment. It's people, you know, the adverts are out there and people apply. Some of this shift is going to definitely change how people view it, and how the most effective recruitment processes, I think, are going to become more proactive. So finding the people for those vacancies. So yeah, there's a lot of thoughts I could share, but I won't talk all day. Yeah, I think that would be sort of a bit of an overview.
Brilliant. Thanks, Claire. I'm sure that definitely answered that question. And I've noticed that loads of comments are coming through, so we'll fly around the room quite quickly on these. Rachel, I'll come to you on this one. You can probably see the question there on screen, which is how might we bridge a gap between roles in sectors that offer hybrid working and those in our trusts at our TTO?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Just because the term time only doesn't mean that they can't have a bit of hybrid working as well. It goes back to that factor of, do they have to be on site all the time? And I think it's also, you know, it's policies and procedures with HR, but it's also about having a balance and you know, at the end of the day, staff are human beings. And so it comes back to that culture. So if it's a one-off temporary thing that they need to go and you know, do something, then, you know, this isn't a change in terms and conditions. Let's support staff. They're human beings at the end of the day. And if you actually allow them, you know, 10 minutes early to go and make sure they're there for the boiler to be delivered, or, you know what, they're having a crisis with their own child, they'll remember that. They're the sort of things, those small things that will help you retain staff. that will help them on social media networks and WhatsApp groups, etc., in the local community go, do you know what, they're a great employer to work for. So I think sometimes it's not big strategic things. It's making sure that the small things are done right. And I think sometimes it can be, it's sometimes the further up the chain or the structure you are, and I'm not hierarchical in any way, you sometimes presume that these little things are continuing, or that's what you want to do. And that's why, those programs, those drama programs where the CEO goes down on the office floor or whatever, they're great. Well, do you know what? That's what HR directors need to do. They need to get back into that admin office, because your receptionist is the front-facing person. They meet the parents, they see the pupils, etc. And your websites as well. And that's what people, years ago, 20 years ago, I'm showing my age, you go into the reception area and you ask for an admin pack for recruitment, etc. Not these days. It's Twitter, it's Facebook, it's however you advertise, however you're out there. So your website. And do you know what? Sell yourself as an employer, because it's, in one sense, if they're going to be thinking about joining a school, they want to join that school environment. So really think about that whole staff. It's not just about how teachers can interact with the pupils. It's about, on sports day, on theatre trips, on parents' evenings, on whatever day, the playground things. How can they actually get the enjoyment of working in a pupil environment? Because sometimes, you can be having a really, really bad day as an office person, or as a finance person, or as a lunchtime organizer. I'm sure sometimes the pupils can cause the nightmares as well. But actually, the nice interactions with the pupils can sometimes make your day and turn it around. And so sometimes I think it's thinking strategically in a small way of those quick wins. And I think to advertise yourself as an employer of choice. That is basically what you're doing. You're up against, Boots and WH Smiths and the local the local hotel, etc. But also you're up against the other schools. So why would they choose you? What are you going to do to make sure that they, it's all about well-being. It's like people were saying, people are going to want to come and stay for an employer that will look after them. And so clear that, yes, you've got to make your safer recruitment very clear and safeguarding, but is it very clear that you've got wellbeing awards? Is it very clear that you're going to invest in CPD? And is it very clear that you have team building events and staff events and things like that? And you know what? That's the sort of thing that will help. Where so you might not be able to offer the same as other employers, but it comes back to that culture. And I appreciate that you're very, very strapped for cash. So sometimes it is the quick wins, it's the shout outs, it's the, just ensuring that line managers and managers actually say, when they see a job being well done, that's vocalized and not just assumed. Sometimes it's the small things, and it's very much about that team working. And if that feeling, that nurturing, that nature is there in an organization, then when people walk around, they're going to go, oh yeah, it's great working here. It's this, that, and the other. And what's out there on WhatsApp and social media will be all positive about the school. And that is a godsend. It's something that, quite frankly, in money and investment can't buy. And it's the same. It's exactly the same. If you have a bad name for pupils, then it's very difficult to turn it around. It's exactly the same for staff. So it's adding up all those small things. It's not necessarily all about the pay. You have to accept that sometimes there's something you cannot change from a HR legal point of view, but what can you offer instead?
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Rachel. I hope that helps Alex. Now we've got quite a bit of a long question here, which I'll come to Lois and hopefully Lisa, if she's still with us, on as well. We'll start with you, Lois. So with regard to multi-academy trusts, how do you balance school-based and central team decision-making regarding recruitment? Are you looking to centralise more of the workforce to share resources or retain more dedicated school-based resources? I'm a really slow reader, sorry.
Long question, isn't it? Essentially, we operate as a multi-academy trust, and we have an executive leadership team. On that executive leadership team, we've got the heads of the heads of our primary schools, because that's the way we're structured. Director of Education for primary, secondary, our HR person, our finance person, and essentially because things are quite tight at the moment, there's a lot of that information that comes through to that executive team that meets on a weekly basis, because we have to really ensure that any role that we are recruiting is going to bring benefits for the wider trust. So whether that's a teacher in a class in a primary school, or whether that's for an SSO in our secondary school, for example, the way that we operate by very nature of a multi-academy trust is around collaboration. We need to make sure that that decision making is the right thing for everybody. So that's how we do it through that executive team. And in order for that to work right, all of those team members need to appreciate the challenges of all of our schools. So whether you're just a primary person, you still need to have a good understanding of the aspirations and the risks in our secondary, for example, and vice versa. And that's why that particular forum works really well.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lois. Just over to you as well, Lisa. Any comments on that?
Yeah, so we're exactly the same. We're a very much a smaller MAT, so we've only got 3 schools, and again we make recruitment decisions based on a needs basis. So whenever we have a gap in our school, doesn't matter whether it's school or central team, actually we're always reflecting and looking at what that job looks like, and actually if it needs to be shaped in such a way that actually it feeds into kind of that more central structure, then that decision is based and made then. But actually it's trying to look at our structure in terms of systems and processes. So actually what do we need as a central team, but equally can we funnel that down so we're meeting the needs of the schools equally. So it's an isolated decision, but again, in terms of our central team and executive team, I guess those conversations are happening at that layer.
Oh, sorry. Have I been muted that whole time? Gosh.
I can hear you
Right.
now.
Anyway, I'll start from the top. Sorry. So we've had a bit of a kind of spicy question anonymously, which is there a divide still between teaching and support staff? How do we ensure better collaboration? I was saying if anyone wants to put the hand up to answer that quite tough one, but I didn't realise I was on mute. So
I don't mind talking to that, Matt.
Go for it.
And again, this is the whole essence of a multi-academy trust, and certainly from the other questions when we've been talking about change and values and vision, etc. This is the absolute key in how a multi-academy trust absolutely works. I think traditionally, years gone by, teachers were the ones who were put on pedestals and everything happened around them, and that is not necessarily the true. Yeah, they're at the coal face, no doubt about it, but in order for those teachers to be really effective and for us to get the best outcomes for our children, they've got to be really well supported by systems and processes in school that Lisa's spoken about, but equally around ensuring that through a multi-academy trust approach and centralised systems, they can concentrate on teaching and learning. And this is particularly the case for head teachers, because they don't have to worry necessarily about the finance, about the HR, about the hole in the roof, because that is all taken away from them. And I think that is one of the real benefits that can work within that MAT setting.
Brilliant. Any other comments? Yeah, Rachel?
Can I just add, I think it's absolutely key and crucial that, what we're talking about to do with the recruitment retention crisis in education, workforce and culture that we're talking about today, it's got to be seen as whole staff. So, your inset days, it should involve everybody. Staff well-being, it should involve everybody. In other words, if you have your own lunchtime organisers, if you do your own catering staff, admin staff, they should all have CPD in their own right. They should all have that flexibility where you can, dependent on roles. It should not be seen as to support staff and teachers. And the reason for that being, for me, typical, because I'm huge on safeguarding as well, is the kiddies do not look at the staff like that. The glue, that culture, is not just the teaching staff. It is that receptionist. It is that business manager. It is that lunchtime organizer, the cook. They are the people that will make the staff and the pupils feel that nurturing atmosphere. And that will retain staff in, but also from a safeguarding perspective, if you're investing and you're ensuring that everybody's up to speed on that sort of thing, and pupils can go to whoever they want. So for me, it's an absolute key thing that leaders should really stop seeing it as support staff and teachers. I have to say, I'll be very honest in answering this question. I think people who work in the sector, there are still, unfortunately, some educational establishments that very much not only tally up and data report separately. Sometimes they don't even do performance management with support staff. Yes, there's certain things that are different that you have to do, but there are the ways in which you treat staff, even down to, support staff not really being entitled to go into staff rooms. That still happens. And that's what you've got to move away from, because sooner or later, your jobs will not be recruited to again and again and again. So hopefully we're moving well away from that. But unfortunately, I think it'll come back to bite people on the bottoms of those who aren't doing it already. Yeah.
Sorry, I've done it again. We'll come to you, Claire, for 30 seconds. And then I've got a final question as well, which will be for Lisa as well.
No problem. Yeah, I just wanted to, it was actually just sort of fill in a little bit more on what Rachel was saying, which is perfect. But from that teacher and TA relation, working in the recruitment field and particularly working with temporary workers over the years, I think one of the most challenging things is when you get the feedback that a temporary member of staff, a TA in particular, a classroom assistant, doesn't want to go back because they're not being cared for by the teacher. They're not being given the chance to have that relationship. That's something that's so sad, because it's two great members of staff just not collaborating. And I think that is something that I know a lot of organisations, and MATs in particular, because you've got that bigger picture over multiple schools. Sometimes it helps you to get out of the bubble that sometimes an individual school can find themselves in so unwittingly. But that's such an important thing to try and do, is create a really positive feel between that TA and that teacher, in particular if you're talking support staff and the teaching staff. And I know, we've mentioned on the call before, it's not about titles, it's not about who's this, it's about the fact you're two adults in the room, you're working together. And that if you're, as a member of support staff, treated with that respect to do your job to the best of your abilities, you will probably do a better job than you would have done otherwise. And going right back to the beginning, you're more likely to be retained. You're more likely to want to stay, to seek out the HR team and say, how do I do teacher training through your skit, to do all of those things, because you feel valued and welcome. And I think it just brings it right back to that first message on culture, really.
Brilliant. Thank you, Claire. So to finish off, we just have a question which I think is probably more directed towards Lisa. Now, it was, what innovative ways have you used or plan to use to offset the rise of salaries and support staff pay rise, which I know was dropped on everyone, I think, a few weeks before term time?
Oh, so that's a tough question, I have to say. So I think, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because I think that some of those increases that we've had to absorb, you have to absorb as part of some of your reserves, perhaps. So actually, in terms of balancing that, actually it's where you shave your expenditure elsewhere. Now, ultimately, what we don't want to do is put our curriculum and our teaching and learning at a detriment because of that. So it is a balancing act. And actually, in terms of innovative ways of fundraising, you know, it's looking at funding streams, it's looking at where we can perhaps look at different sources of income. But then, of course, we're limited on that front as well, because actually, when you're looking at a cost of living rise, and, you know, we've got parents that are in a precarious financial situation, actually, our fundraising activities are going to be restricted as a result. So actually, I think if I'm completely honest, in terms of my own personal opinion, I think we're entering a precarious situation, and I think it's feeling very uncertain. And actually, at the moment, it is about, if we've got reserves, how are we going to use those reserves in order to, you know, offset the increased costs. Actually, you know, in terms of budget setting and in the previous financial year, well, actually, we didn't foresee these rises, so that we are going to take a hit financially. I mean, we've got an extremely passionate and strong CFO, and we've also got a charities and communities leader who works with other corporations and other businesses in order to kind of tap into their corporate social responsibility aims, to try and kind of get them on board in terms of assisting in whichever way. And whether it's kind of, I guess it is being creative and constantly thinking outside of the box. But unfortunately, I don't have answers. You know, it is a watch, wait and see.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Lisa. In typical, you know that we're live because my AirPods have just died. So everyone's actually on mute. Now, just whilst I do sort that, I saw a nodding head from Lois, which I know you definitely probably have an opinion on that. So we'll come to you.
Yeah, let me just, this is definitely a question for the accountants out there, isn't it? Because this is facing the sector. We're all staring down the barrel of a gun in relation to this one. And you can see all of the various different agencies out there are all petitioning government, aren't they, around these unfunded pay rises. How on earth are we all going to manage? And you cannot do this through reserves. Anybody who has to sustain their organisation through the utilisation of their reserves on a year-on-year basis is going to go bust, because it is just not a sustainable thing to do or the right thing to do. Certainly from our perspective, we're having to be really thorough in terms of looking at our spending, whether that's utilising integrated curriculum financial planning or just looking at the effectiveness of where we're spending our money and making sure that we get sufficient bang for our buck. But it's with the impact of increased energy costs as well, in addition to these unfunded pay rises and also other inflationary pay pressures as well. It's a really, really difficult position. We're going to have to look at how we can reduce our costs. We're going to have to look at how we can drive our revenue in a similar way to what Lisa's just spoken about, but at the end of the day, we know that's really difficult. So if we still want to maintain our positive culture and value our staff as we do in our vision, because our vision talks about being the educator and employer of choice, we're going to have to be more innovative in ways that in which we do that, and that is, you know, can be anything from rather than paying overtime, giving people time back, for example, or just really, again, looking at some of those little things that we do to value and recognise our staff. And there's little things that we've done. I've got a little badge on here. That is the Inspire Recognition Award. So that's something that we have tried to do on the back of recognising all of those fabulous efforts all of our staff have made across the 2 years when we were going through the pandemic. So it's as a sector, we're going to have to change because if we don't change, we're going to get left behind, and that is going to require that constant innovation in our works and our practices if we're going to be able to do with the main thing which we are all here for, is to deliver an outstanding education for all of our pupils, no matter where they live or what their postcode is. And it's hard work.
Thank you very much for your thoughts on that. So that basically brings us to an end of the show. So thank you very much, Claire, Lois, Rachel, and Lisa. There we go. We got to see Lisa right at the end there. So thank you very much for joining us, all four of you. That was a really good discussion there, and some really good questions as well. We'll be returning in 2 weeks where the topic of conversation will be growth. So you might see some familiar faces again on that show. But thank you very much to all four of you, and see you soon.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.